The following is a production of Cary TV, the Town of Cary's government access channel.
I'm going to call to order the May 20th meeting of our Cary Planning and Zoning Board. And we will begin our meeting by adopting our agenda, and I believe we have an amendment.
We do. I'd like to move that we amend the agenda so that item D3, the LDO Round 25 review, becomes item E1. Item E, new and old business, becomes item F. Item F, adjournment, becomes item G.
Excellent. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That motion carries unanimously. We will move on to approve our work session minutes from March 11th and April 22nd. And if we don't have any modifications, I'll try to do them both in one vote. Let's give this a try. Do we have any corrections or no corrections to either? Could we have a motion then to approve both sets of minutes, please?
So moved to approve both.
We have a motion, Mr. Miller. We have a second. Second. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, that motion carries unanimously. We're then going to move on to our cases requiring a public hearing. Just a little background about our public hearing process. We're going to start with a member of our staff introducing the case at this podium on our left. Following that, we're going to hear from the applicant. Actually, before we hear from the applicant, I'm going to open the public hearing. It's a new procedure that we've instituted. And we're going to begin with the applicant, and then we're going to hear from individual speakers that want to address that case. Each speaker has 5 minutes to address us. We ask people to be succinct, to pick a spokesman if multiple people want to speak to the same issues. You'll notice the little black box on the podium here. During the first 4.5 minutes of a speaker's comments, that box will have a green light on it. After 4.5 minutes, a yellow light will light, and after 5 minutes, a red light will come on. And when the red light comes on, I'm going to ask you to finish to be fair to other speakers. That said, I'm going to open our first case, which is 12 CPA 07, the Meacham property. And Ms. Chandler, you are here. Okay.
I am here. Good evening. This case is a comprehensive plan amendment request for the Meacham property. It's located at 7640 and also one other unaddressed property on Carpenter Fire Station Road. It's for 15 acres. The property is located at the northeast corner of Carpenter Fire Station Road and Green Level Church Road. Notification of this plan amendment request was sent to properties shown in yellow on this map. This slide shows stream buffers and floodways within and around the subject property. And the slide shows parks and greenways. And please note there is a future town park immediately north of the subject property. Both Green Level Church Road and Carpenter Fire Station Road are existing major thoroughfares. And there are no current or planned transit routes in the immediate vicinity. As per the Northwest Area Plan, the current land use designation for the subject property is mixed use and includes Northwest Area Plan Note 10, which states that at least half of the mixed use areas should be used for medium or high density residential. The subject property is also located within the Cary Park Community Mixed Use Activity Center. The applicant proposes to change the land use designation to commercial with removal of Northwest Area Plan Note 10. At the Town Council public hearing on February 27th, one citizen stated support for commercial land use, and an adjacent property owner representative noted that he believed the community is adequately served by existing retail. This table shows land use and development with existing and potential build-out in the Cary Park Community Mixed Use Center. In the potential build-out column, the figures come from a combination of development in the pipeline as well as potential development on the subject property, and a range is given because we don't know exactly how that will turn out. Could be a mix of commercial or office. And also in the potential build-out column, the totals come from potential development on a few other smaller vacant parcels in the Cary Park Center. So if you note on the far right-hand side, recommended general characteristics come from the Town of Cary land use plan. And in a community-sized center, the recommended general characteristics give ranges for commercial and office floor space as well as residential units that are looked at per 1,000 square feet of non-residential space. So you can see in the numbers, whether at the low end or the high end with the total potential build out, that still falls on the low end of the recommended range for commercial or retail, and it falls short either way with the office floor space, and the residential units are on balance in the center. So as far as the analysis of the request goes, staff believes that both mixed use and commercial may be appropriate for this site. Having a mix of commercial and office development, which could come with a mixed use land use designation, that has the potential of providing the best balance of uses. And the recommended amount of residential development is met, and but there's still room for more non-residential floor space. And we believe it's reasonable to remove Northwest Area Plan Note 10 because of the amount of residential that is in the mixed-use center. So the Land Development Ordinance cites 4 criteria to consider when determining whether or not a comprehensive plan amendment is necessary. Staff believes the first item, change in projections or assumptions, has been met because of development patterns and uses have varied from the original Northwest Area Plan, and resulting in a greater amount of residential development than originally anticipated. So staff recommends approval of the removal of Northwest Area Plan Note 10 while maintaining the mixed-use land use designation instead of the commercial, because we believe the balance of uses would be at its best with the mixed-use designation in the Cary Park Mixed-Use Center. Following the public hearing tonight, the Planning and Zoning Board may make a recommendation on this comprehensive plan amendment request. This time, I'd like to invite the applicant up to make a presentation.
Thank you, Meredith. Good evening. My name is Glenda Topp. with Glenn Desktop and Associates, and I'm here representing the property owners. The request is to amend the Northwest Area Plan to remove note number 10 and to replace the mixed-use land use category with commercial. Parcel is approximately 15 acres. Just want to note that the Meachams have owned the property for approximately 46 years. One family member still lives on the property, and during their time on the property, obviously they've seen tremendous change in the area. As was pointed out, the current land use designation is mixed use. There is a note on the plan that addresses the mix between commercial, non-residential, and medium to high density. As staff has pointed out, they do support our request to remove note number 10. There is sufficient housing, both medium and high density, in that area already, and the percentage in a community activity center has already been met. I do want to point out that those numbers do not include in the area developments that have occurred with single-family development, and also the potential in the area around this site for additional multifamily land. If you look on the land use plan in other parts of Cary Park, there is the potential for additional medium-density residential. And again, based on the guidelines, there is room for additional non-residential floor space. In addition to removing note number 10, we are asking that the land use change from mixed use to commercial. Just want to note that when the Northwest Plan was adopted in 2002, there was a site in Cary Park called TC3 that was approved for 200,000 square feet of commercial and 200,000 square feet of office, plus 200 residential units. There was an amendment that 400,000 square feet total was deleted. The remaining residential component stayed. This was going to be the main town center for Cary Park. Again, with the reduction of this square footage, we feel that there is the need for the additional commercial development. As was pointed out, there has been changes and assumptions and patterns of development in the area since the adoption of the Northwest Area Plan. In staff's recommendation, which is saying that they prefer the mix, the balance that they would like to see more of is office. With what's out there now, the potential is there for office development. Actually, in the staff report, there could be, depending upon development patterns, around 60,000 square feet of office that could be developed. We also want to note that it's important to know that the commercial land use category, and more specifically commercial zoning, does permit office and institutional uses. Given the size of the tract, a commercial designation for the parcel will allow a more vibrant and successful center. Leasing can occur based on market demands versus forcing a use that is needed or that is not needed or wanted to serve the area. If there is a need for office uses like a bank, a doctor's office, insurance office, they would be able to go into a commercial land use / zoning category. Also, with the approval of this case, the original node that was going to be for the non-residential component within Cary Park would be moved to the intersection of Cary Fire Station Road and Green Level Church Road. We held 2 neighborhood meetings. Staff alluded to one concern of a property owner that did speak at the public hearing. We had one property owner who came to the first meeting and wanted to know when they could lease space in our area. And then there was really just some concerns raised by the residents about what the development would be like next to them. And what we pointed out to them, because we're in a mixed-use overlay district, we'll be required to submit a preliminary development plan. And with that preliminary development plan, we will have to specifically show the location of buildings, parking, transition from the townhomes to our property, access, et cetera, and that the opportunity for them to comment on that would be at the time of zoning. And that was something that at those meetings they were most concerned about. And again, we stressed that this was not a regular rezoning where they would not have that opportunity, but because of the mixed-use overlay district, they will have the opportunity to review the plan and give all the detail and comments they would like. Again, we do believe that note number 10, there's support to remove it. There is our belief that the land use would be best suited as commercial, and we ask for your support, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you.
And at this point, we will ask any speakers wishing to address us to come forward. Anyone at all?
Good evening. My name is James Dean, and I'm a Senior Vice President of Clearing Partners. My firm is also well-versed in real estate development activities similar in scope to the proposed Meacham Development Project, as we regularly execute ground-up development on a regular basis for select clients. For those of you that are not familiar with our firm, our current North Carolina investment activities include a portfolio valued at approximately $1.1 billion. Those current investments in Cary locally exceed $80 million and include Cary Park Town Center, Centrum Shopping Center, and the Arboretum at Weston. Our single largest to-date North Carolina investment is a majority ownership interest in the Crabtree Valley Mall. First, I'd like to thank the Planning and Zoning Board for providing me with an opportunity to address the board tonight. I'm here to speak out in opposition to the proposed request for approval of a comprehensive plan amendment that would change the land use designation applicable to the Meacham site to 100% commercial and remove Northwest Area Plan Note 10 from applying to the subject parcels. In summary, we're opposed to the proposed plan amendment for the following reasons. First, although staff is willing to support the removal or requirement for at least half of the MDX areas being used for medium or high-density residential, the recommendation does not appear to be grounded in a more comprehensive analysis of existing land use designations of other parcels currently subject to the Northwest Area Plan, and how said sites could be negatively impacted by an increase in commercial and retail density at the Meacham site. The Cary Park ownership respectfully asks the board to reconsider if such a land use change can be supported, and, if approved, to what degree restrictions regarding allowable types and density of commercial uses should ultimately apply to the Meacham site going forward. As restrictions regarding the nature of mixed-use development currently apply to the site and were carefully considered when the Northwest Area Plan was approved, we believe any change in land use should require appropriate use and density restrictions that adequately consider surrounding land use plan designations. As you consider the surrounding land uses and development sites, please note that there are currently 4 approved shopping center development sites within 1.5 miles of the Meacham site. Those sites include the Stonewater site, which is at the northwest corner of O'Kelly Chapel Road and Green Level Church Road. That site's currently owned by Food Lion. Parkside, which is at North Carolina Highway 55 and I-540. That site is currently the subject of development that will accommodate a future Target and a Harris Teeter. The Amberley Town Center site and the Alston Activity Center, which has various sites along North Carolina 55 between McCrimmon Parkway and I-540. One or more of the noted sites can support future grocery store development, something that will only serve to further dilute the immediate grocery trade area surrounding the Meacham and Cary Park sites. 2, removing the required residential density will not provide an adequate opportunity to ensure an appropriate transition between future commercial uses and the existing residential housing located immediately adjacent to the Meacham site. While I'm not attempting to speak directly for the noted homeowners group, I would imagine they would be concerned about the lack of an appropriate buffer and/or transition between uses and how same may impact the existing residential development. Issues impacting the existing residential include, but are not limited to, commercial loading and service areas, which is important in this particular case given the existing topography of the Meacham site, noise and light pollution, and a requirement to connect the sites to allow for connectivity of the residential use to the non-residential uses. All the noted issues require careful consideration as part of any plan amendment process. 3, as mentioned in the staff report, office and institutional space in the Cary Park Community Mixed-Use Center is extremely light compared to commercial floor space and residential development. That said, a proposed modification of the Meacham land use designation leaves the developer with flexibility to substantially influence actual use and density in a way that may not best complement the existing community mixed-use center density characteristics. The Meacham site is not a destination retail location in our opinion, meaning the site will support the immediate 1 to 3 mile trade area. Accordingly, the Meacham and Cary Park Town Center sites cannot adequately support a second large box or full-service grocery store. In summary, allowing future development on the Meacham site to include higher density commercial and retail uses is not consistent with the current activity center plan and will ultimately hurt the long-term economic viability of the Cary Park Community Mixed-Use Center. In summary, when Clarion Partners purchased Cary Park Town Center, we expected to see future growth in housing that was ultimately expected to strengthen the immediate retail trade area. Should the proposed change be approved, said residential growth will not occur, hurting Cary Park Town Center. While Clarion Partners is not against some form of additional commercial and retail development, we strongly believe that any change in the terms of the existing misuse designation to include 50% residential must also be accompanied with new designations that ensure a complementary set of uses is ultimately delivered in such a manner as to best complement the land use goals established by the town of
I'm sorry,
Cary.
I need you to stop you right there. Your time has
Thank you.
expired.
Done.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to speak to us? Anyone at all? Seeing no one approaching the dais, I'm going to close the public hearing and open this case for, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Take that back, I did not close the public hearing. Please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Sunita Singh, and I'm a resident at Camden Town Homes in Cary Park. While not depriving the Meacham family of any economically beneficial or productive use of their property, as a neighboring citizen, I'd like to voice my opinion before the board. Even though this property is within 400 feet of my subject property, it's not just about me, but what's in the best interest of the neighboring citizens. So I started inquiring about whether a study was done to analyze the needs of the community and what exactly Mr. Meacham has in mind before I formed an opinion. I've heard mention of a grocery store, retail business, and small office space. And after talking to some of my neighbors, I have to say that that's not necessarily what the community needs. For example, we have a Harris Teeter in the area, and lots of people like to shop at Walmart, so we don't need another supermarket. We also don't need a CVS or Walgreens, neither do we need any fast food restaurants, as we already have a Subway and a McDonald's. What we don't have is a gas station in close proximity, and a lot of people said that would be nice. Or enough walkable places to go and things to do in the area. So a fancy restaurant would be nice, some specialty stores would be nice. Office space would be nice if they provide jobs for the Panther Creek High School kids, for example. Anything to make our neighborhood more vibrant. As the earlier speakers already said, I think there's enough, or we have more than enough residential buildings going on. Anyway, whatever the outcome of this plan amendment request, it would be nice to have some of the current woods remaining as a buffer zone between that property and ours, not only to keep noise away, but to preserve nature. There are many variety of birds in the area, and it would be wonderful to be able to continue to feed them and hear them chirping. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to address us?
I am Kai Xuan Xu. I'm also a resident in.
Can I ask you to speak into this microphone?
Sorry.
Our media people are very specific about this.
Yeah, I'm also a resident in Camden Village.
Could you speak your name again? So.
Oh, I'm Kai Xuan Xu. I'm also a resident in Camden Village Park, and actually my property is just facing this this new zone area. And right now we can enjoy I think my neighbor already made a very good point, like what we need from the residents in this neighborhood perspective. We want the council consider not only the interest of the Cary town, but also the interest of the property owner in this neighborhood. So right now, from my second floor, in this, actually, there's a whole lot of building on my row. So you can actually see the beautiful trees, like my neighbor mentioned. There's a lot of natural reserve in that woods. So, and it's not only provide a buffer from us from the noisy road on the green level church road, it also, reserve our nature, provide some green and also beautiful woods for our kids to grow up. So the only concern I have just try to emphasize what our neighbor already mentioned is the buffer. We really want to maintain a decent buffer for us to protect the nature and also provide some space for the kids to grow in our neighbor. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to address this case?
Good evening. My name is Kevin McCraw with RKM Development, and just want to try to address a couple of the issues some of the residents have had that they've spoke up about tonight. And we just want the opportunity to get to the point where we can get to this preliminary development plan, where we can work with the residents, being our neighbors, to work on the buffers, the screening, the access points, and just the cohesiveness of the entire development between us and them. So that's kind of where we are, and we just want to, like I said, be good neighbors and just have the opportunity to present a plan to them to make everybody happy, so we can get this put together and make it a better community. Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone at all? Seeing no one, I'm going to close the public hearing and open this case for questions.
I have a few.
Mr. Miller.
This is in, Ms. Chandler, this is in an activity center, a mixed-use activity center?
Yes, that's correct.
Do you have anything that shows the boundaries? I don't know if there was a slide that showed that.
Yes. Let's see. The blue line shows the Cary Park community-sized mixed-use center. The text at the bottom of the slide for note 10 obviously covers up the bottom border.
All right, thank you. And so this would need a preliminary development plan, as the applicant stated?
That would be
regardless of the,
required
right,
if
of the land
rezoning
use
comes in,
designation, right.
yes.
And like the applicant also stated, if this were a commercial land use designation, presumably looking forward to commercial zoning, you could have office, professional office kinds of things in a shopping center kind of, that's correct?
And often, like in the center across the street, there is a medical office.
Okay. And if it were to remain mixed-use designation, would we then be looking for a specific mix of office and commercial uses beyond recommendation? Or, I mean, is that a requirement, or how does that?
With the, if the mixed-use designation remains, when, let's say, a rezoning case came in, for that preliminary development plan, we'd be looking for some mix. Precedent that's been set before is in the range of 20 to 30%. That's just simply an example of what let's say, office could be a certain percentage, and retail, commercial could be the remaining.
And the last one I have for now is the buffer requirements would be looked at rezoning time or at the preliminary development plan time. Is that correct?
Right, that's something that can be discussed. However, I don't believe we can go beyond what's required in the land development ordinance. However, it is worth pointing out in the stream buffers and floodways, you can see that there's an urban transition buffer adjacent to the townhomes. So that creates a nice natural buffer in that area.
Almost required buffer, right? And would there be a difference in buffer requirements based on the land use plan of MXD versus commercial? That's just a zoning. Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Yes. So just to follow up, if we did remove note 10 but left it at MXD, there could still be a big box grocery store there.
That is correct.
So as long as there was some of something other than retail, maybe 20%, it would be okay.
Sure, with the mixed use as the land use designation, the applicant could come in with a mix of commercial and office, a mix of commercial and residential, office and residential, anything. There's flexibility.
And so the biggest change that we would be making by changing this to commercial is that we would be eliminating any residential from that area.
That is true, but either way, with the removal of Note 10, that half of the area is no longer would be required to have residential.
So with MXD, there may or may not be residential.
Correct.
With commercial, there will not be.
Right. That's correct.
Okay, would he have to state ahead of time how much with a residential there would be with MXD?
With the preliminary development plan, that would show a site plan with uses designated on it and square footage amounts or number of units or whatever is proposed.
All right, thank you. And just one other thing, outside of that blue line that you showed earlier, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, most of that area is residential or is designated as future residential.
Right. Immediately around the center, you can see it's low-density residential, medium-density residential, and some high-density residential.
Okay, so we do have a large, even beyond the blue line, there's a large amount of residential.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Warner, I think you're next.
Meredith, in regard to the MDX designation, they would not necessarily have to come in and include a mix of residential. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Did your analysis look at the broader area, even outside the district here, with respect to how well the area is served by commercial? For example, I notice if you go on down Green Level Church Road, there really isn't that much commercial other than the one Cary Town or the Cary Park development here. Did your analysis look at that?
Not specifically. No. When we do the analysis for an area within a mixed-use center, we have all of those metrics available, and we typically look at that. You're right, if you do eyeball the Northwest Area Plan area in this vicinity, it's more residential. I believe Mr. Dean from Clarion was mentioning some other projects. The Alston Regional Activity Center is not too far away, and that'll be a major spot.
When you look at the map here, the area to the right, or I guess to the east of the Cary Park development, isn't that pre-approved now for residential?
Yes, let me go back to the land use slide. You can see the portion that has the curve of HDR and MDR, the larger square parcel that was recently approved for 150 units for Glencroft Townhomes.
And you also have to the west of the subject site a potential residential, as well as catty corner from the site, you have residential as well.
Yes, where you're
potentially planned. Right?
looking at the part labeled as MDR.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Buss.
Meredith, can you go back to the graph where you showed all the difference proposed and everything? I just want to make sure that I understand.
This one?
Yes. So what is existing and what's the total? The total is what is proposed or what's allowed in that area?
The total includes existing plus potential.
Okay. All right. That's all I needed. Thank you.
I've got one. Ms. Chandler, go back to your slide showing the mixed-use center,
The picture or the table?
the border that we've all been looking at here. Now, what I'm trying to do is reconcile what I see here with the email we received from the applicant. And I'll read this statement, and then you can help me out with this. It says, this will allow a more vibrant and successful center with the approval of the CPA request. The commercial node that was originally planned for the intersection of Carpenter Fire Station Road and Cary Glen Boulevard would be relocated to the intersection of Carpenter Fire Station Road and Green Level Church Road. I'm trying to see where that commercial exists in this display.
You will not see it on this display. Ms. Top is referring to a previous version of the land use plan. If you note where north of Carpenter Fire Station Road, where it's labeled MDR, or medium density residential, and it has the very curvy road and the one cul-de-sac, that's the area she's referring to.
So at one time, that was going to be the commercial site.
At one time, that was going to be commercial.
Do you have any idea why it was placed in that manner? Was Green Level Church not expected to be the type of thoroughfare that it turned out to be?
I may need some help from Mr. Ramage with some history on that.
At the time the Northwest Area Plan was being developed, and this is going back a ways, back in '02, that quadrant where you see the MDR right here, it was actually the owners of the Cary Park Planned Unit Development came to the town and they initiated the request saying we would like the Northwest Plan to show that piece of land for a mix of commercial, office, and high-density housing. And the whole activity center went, by the time it was finally adopted by council, changed from being a neighborhood activity center to community size. So it happened during the final 6 months of plan development. So but it was initiated by the applicant. The applicant asked that that tract be changed in the zoning and reflected in the plan, and it was approved that way.
Anything else? Any other questions?
I just want to have some clarification. If we left it as mixed use, then it can be only used for commercial and maybe office, but not residential.
Actually, if it's left at mixed use, it could be used for any combination of commercial, office, residential.
So it could be 100% commercial. No, it cannot be 100%.
It would have to be two of the three uses I just mentioned.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Just a point of clarification. So if there was 100% retail commercial use that somebody wanted to do, they couldn't do it under the MXD. They would have to do it under the commercial. Is that right? If you didn't have a second component of either residential or office?
Well, through the mixed-use rezoning process and with the preliminary development plan, the applicant could come in with whatever they wish to ask for. It would not be in compliance with the land use plan. Having the mixed-use land use designation sets the foundation for having at least two of the three: retail, office, and residential.
Okay. So they would have to have two
It would
to
work
be compliant
more,
with mixed use.
right, to be.
And so if they want to do 100% commercial, this is their
Sure,
only
but
option.
that percentage would be figured out during the process. There's not a defined, there's not a defined 20% or 30%. It would have to be determined reasonable.
Sure, because you got to look at the whole
Through the
center.
process.
Right, okay.
Other questions?
Well, this seems to be a sliding scale to me, this whole issue of what percentage breaks out between these three designations. And that's what it really is, isn't it? I mean, there's no bingo number. There's no 33, 33, 33. That's not the expectation here. The ideal goal would be a balance.
Sure.
But I think we could have somebody come in with 100% commercial use on an MDX piece of property, and if the bordering properties within that mixed-use center have met the criteria of residential, institutional, office, whatever, then that 100% commercial would probably be acceptable, would it not?
Certainly, that's one of the benefits of our mixed-use rezoning process with the preliminary development plan. There's that large component of community involvement and input and compromise that typically takes place that hopefully ends up with the best plan possible.
I just think sometimes we keep looking for some number to sort of say, well, this makes sense. And in many instances, when you're dealing with something like this, which is on the far edge of town and development hasn't been complete, but it's been intensive, who knows what works and what won't work.
Other questions? In that case, perhaps we have a motion?
I'll try one. I move that the board forward case number 12 CPA 07, the Meacham property, to town council with a recommendation for approval to amend the land use plan as proposed and to clarify, as proposed by the applicant, to change the land use designation to commercial with the removal of note 10.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second discussion.
Yes.
Mr. Shaw.
I like the idea. I think that we have as much residential in this area as we need or possibly could hold. And so that leaves commercial and office type use. And while MXD may work well for that, with the removal of note 10, I definitely am in favor of that. MXD still would probably work. However, commercial would also work. It can be a mix. It could be decided upon later exactly what the mix is as we find out, or as the applicant finds out what the market need is. I am concerned about the amount of buffering between this and the high-density residential, the townhomes, just to the east. However, I think that concern really doesn't depend on the classification of this. It would apply either mixed or commercial. And so we'll have to trust that in the site plan and development of the plan that it will be kept in mind that we do need, and I gather that the residents nearby do want a reasonable amount of buffering. And it would also be very good to have uses against that east border that would be the type of thing people would walk to, which is not necessarily grocery stores. That you pretty much have to drive to because of what you're carrying, but coffee shops and restaurants and things like that you could easily walk to. I know that there are two roads that go right up to the border and are stubbed and would make a very easy path for walking over to the commercial, possibly commercial area, so that we could have uses there, which would be the kind of thing people would like to walk to from the residential. But the buffering, while I think that's important, and I hope that will be looked at site plan very thoroughly, it's something that would apply, my concern would apply regardless. So I'm going to support this.
Mr. Warner.
Mr. Chairman, I too support the motion. I believe that there's more than adequate residential in the area, in the district, as well as additional residential that's in the pipeline in the future. So, but looking at even outside the district that we're looking at, it was my impression in driving around the property there that the entire area is underserved by commercial. And I felt that I would be very comfortable with going again with the motion of commercial from MDX. And so for those reasons, I support it. I would say one thing that in trying to make a decision on these types of projects, sometimes I feel that it would be helpful having some type of master overlay that you could look at and tell what is and what isn't being served by, say, commercial or retail, to give us a sort of a macro view of a particular area that would make decisions on a smaller area a little easier.
Mr. Miller.
I made the motion. I think typically you often think of the MXD land use as perhaps the most flexible. In this case, I think the commercial use remains flexible in that it can still have professional offices, which the residents that were here told us they would like, along with small shops and retail, like people have talked about already in the comments. And I think the commercial just reflects the intent more accurately, that it will be predominantly commercial, perhaps with some professional offices and other services. And that accurate reflection will help people to make the appropriate plans, whether they want to move into the area, start a business or whatever. And so I think in this case, the commercial actually achieves the flexibility while more accurately specifying what the applicant's intent is.
Mr. Gascon.
I would just like to say Mr. Miller hit the nail on the head. I think with the residential component, note 10 taken out of this, commercial actually provides more flexibility, so I'll support the motion.
Other comments? In that case, I'm going to take my privilege to have the last word here. I think sometimes we in government get a little heavy-handed and lose track of the importance of the market. The person that owns this property is trying to make a living by developing it, and he's going to develop it to what the market demands. And I think he's done an analysis that probably is fairly extensive because he's trying to maximize the value of this property as well. And I'm hesitant to disagree with what probably is a very good market force-driven analysis. It seems to me like the commercial request just makes a lot of sense. And so I'm going to support the motion as well. And so now that we've finished our supporting Kumbaya, I think we can call this to vote, right?
No, Mr. Chairman, I have another point of view here.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Nath. I didn't realize that you were still on. Please.
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem with the commercial designation of this property, but I think the mixed-use designation we just discussed give us 100% probability that somebody can come and develop commercial. But if we take the mixed use away from it, then there is no guarantee, if you make it commercial, that there will be any kind of office and industrial development in that area. By keeping it as MXD, we have some chance that there will be at least two categories that will be commercial and mixed use. So in my opinion, that is more flexible solution rather than making it pure commercial and denying the possibility of any kind of office development in that area.
Sorry, I didn't realize you were still waiting to speak. Any other comments? In that case, I'm going to call this motion to a vote. All those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, I believe that's 8-1 to approve. And I'm going to then move on to our next case, which means I need to get my electronics to work here. You'll have to give me a little bit of patience here. I'm going paperless for the first time, and clearly I'm not as good at this as I'd like to be. You have a copy of the agenda. Our next case is 12 REZ 33, Looter Shop rezoning. Ms. Grannon?
Thank you. For your consideration this evening is a request to rezone approximately 76.38 acres located at the 1500 block of Looter Shop Road. The subject property shown here, circled in yellow, is south of West Farrell Road. It's currently in Chatham County. There's an associated annexation petition. Annexation into Cary's corporate limits would be required before the town could apply base zoning or initial zoning to the subject property. Here's a close-up view of the subject property showing the existing conditions. There's a farmhouse, some of the land cleared, and still a good bit of existing trees along the perimeter buffers. Cary's land use plan designation is low-density residential. This land is located in the Chatham-Cary Joint Land Use Plan. The current zoning is Chatham County R1. which allows an opportunity for low-density residential, institutional uses such as schools and churches, and agricultural use. The proposed zoning is residential 8, conditional use. Initially, the applicant proposed the following conditions: that the density be limited to 2 dwelling units per acre, that permitted uses be limited to single-family detached dwelling units, neighborhood recreation or park, public or private, religious institutions, school, either public or private, and that in response to mitigations that were identified in the traffic study, that no construction other than roads or infrastructure would take place until an eastbound right turn lane and westbound left turn lane are provided on Ludershop Road at the entrance to the subject property. And that design and location of those turn lanes be subject to DOT approval and be shown on a development plan as approved by Cary's Development Review Committee. Property owners within 400 feet of the subject property were notified by mail. The property was posted and advertised. Although the property being outside Cary's corporate limits and not having Cary-based zoning was not eligible for a protest petition, there was a good bit of feedback from adjacent property owners. Concern that was expressed at the public hearing was that the lot size was not compatible with the adjacent properties. With R8 zoning, you could have a 8,000 square foot lot. Adjacent property owners were concerned about intensity of institutional uses, building setbacks, and buffers. Since then, the applicant has submitted additional zoning conditions, which is why there's another public hearing this evening. They have proposed that lots adjacent to the southern and western boundary lines be a minimum of 17,500 square feet, and internal lots be a minimum size of 12,000 square feet, and also that a 40-foot type B buffer be provided along the southern property line. The applicant provided an exhibit which identifies that 40-foot perimeter buffer area and where the larger lots would be along the southern and the western property lines. This slide depicts the stream buffers identified on our GIS maps on the subject property. And this shows Ludershop Road, which does not currently show up on Cary's thoroughfare plan. As I mentioned earlier, there is a traffic study that was concluded. The results are in your staff report, and the applicant has offered a zoning condition in response to one of those recommendations. At this time, I'd like to call upon the applicant to provide their justification for the request.
Good evening. Glenda Top with Glenda S. Top and Associates. I almost forgot who I was with. I'll just make this brief. As Deborah pointed out, the request is to rezone the property from a zoning district of R1 that's currently in Wake County to R8 conditional use. The property is in Chatham County, so there is an accompanying annexation petition that is required. The property is located in the Chatham-Cary Joint Land Use Plan. The land use designation for the property is low density with a maximum of 2 units per acre. And that is what we're asking for. I also want to just note that the Joint Land Use Plan was adopted in June of 2012. It started in 2005. It took longer than what people thought. And basically during that time frame, I hate to use the word moratorium, or don't want to use the word moratorium, but basically there were no zonings and developments that came into the town or Chatham County until the plan was adopted. And of course it was adopted by both entities. And that's why you've been seeing lately some development coming in the area of the land use plan. We did revise zoning conditions. There were concerns raised at the public hearing. There were also concerns raised as Deborah pointed out, from adjacent property owners. There was a neighborhood meeting. The property owner has reached out to the neighbors, and there has been numerous conversations about the proposal. As was shown to you, we included a buffer. We increased the lot sizes, so now the minimum lot size on the entire property is 12,000. There's a portion of it for 17,500. Again, we have the condition in there that limits density to 2 units per acre to ensure that the project does remain and is in compliance with the Chatham-Cary Joint Plan. When staff in the staff report discussed transitions and buffering of this property, of course, initially the new conditions were not offered. We feel that with the buffer added and the increase to lot sizes, we have addressed what we hope are most of the concerns of the adjoining property owners with an appropriate transition to the development adjacent to us that is currently in Chatham County. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have, and we ask for your support. Thank you.
At this point, I'm going to open the public hearing and ask anyone that would like to address us to approach the podium.
My name is Terry Heath. I live at 919 Old Thompson Creek Road. My property borders directly on the southeast corner of the 76 acres that we're talking about. The proposal also includes allowing private or public athletic fields. And today I was hand-delivered a letter from one of the property owners that states no athletic field, public or private, shall be located within 500 feet of the common property line. My concern and my neighbors' concerns are that one day when athletic fields show up on the 76 acres, that the concerns would be the same for the 500-foot buffer as they are for the 76 acres. And that would be, number one, lighting. Is lighting allowed on that 500 feet? According to this, only athletic fields, private or public, would be excluded from that 500-foot common property area. We don't want lighting there. Second, parking. Would parking be allowed on that 500-foot buffer? Is that parking paved or is it gravel? The paved obviously is quieter, gravel, noisy and dusty. Noise. Picture yourself as a property owner there in the neighborhood, used to hearing owls and tree frogs and an occasional airplane go over, and being visited by deer and wild turkeys and foxes, and now you get noise from parking or athletic field, or the fact that you've got the lighting that could potentially be on that 500-foot buffer. Also the traffic that flows to that parking, or even out on Ludershop Road. We've got a 2-lane country road that also has bicyclists, that also has joggers, and now they're going to be competing with the additional traffic. Finally, our concerns as property owners are property values. In our estimation, if athletic fields were to go out there on the 76 acres, and if lighting or parking would go on the 50-foot buffer, our property values would decrease. As we've expressed in the previous meeting, a subdivision like Copperleaf would be the ideal transition into a subdivision like Old Thompson Creek, retaining the rural characteristics that it has. One of the property owners will be speaking tonight. about this letter and what it states and what they intend it to state. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
My name is Roy Mashburn. I am one of the two property owners of the 76 acres at Ludershop Road. First of all, we've been working with Terry Heath and his neighbor, Bill Holbert, and I can't remember his last name. Last name's Barry for some time now, and we have no problem with anything Terry has stated tonight. We have no issue at all with it. You may add that as a condition to the rezoning if you see it fits. Secondly, our I guess our density issue was that we want to stay. We applied for annexation, I guess, in Cary in 2005, and we were told at the time, sit tight, we're going to approve a land use plan, and we'll get back with you. Well, somewhat 7-8 years later, we're back at it, and we are in compliance with the current approved land use plan for Chatham County and Cary. And it took some time to do it. With the inclusion of the larger lots around the perimeter and the interior lots, it's probably a pretty good chance we'll never see 2 units per acre. So probably going to see something more like 1.5 to 1.6. So it's going to be considerably less than even what's there right now. We're available for questions if you have any. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Anyone else want to address us in this case? Seeing no one, I'm going to close the public hearing and open this case for questions from the board.
And if I could interrupt, please. I heard what sounded as though there had been a private negotiation between an adjacent property owner and the applicant, where the applicant had presented a zoning condition to the adjacent property owner. That would have to be something, if the applicant wishes to offer it, that they voluntarily present. The board would not implement that or make a recommendation. So I'd like, for the applicant's benefit, if you would like to hear from them. We haven't had a chance to vet this or discuss it and have not seen it officially submitted with an affidavit from the property owner. But clearly, for you to consider it, it would have to be something voluntarily offered willingly by the applicant.
Great. And just to be clear here, if he orally offers it right now as a condition, we can accept that as part of our decision?
You could take it under consideration. It would need to be submitted officially to the staff with an affidavit signed by the property owner indicating what it is and defining it clearly and making sure that it was voluntarily offered. So if the applicant would like to state that that's what their intention is, they can do that up to 10 days before the town council meeting, when council would make its final determination. But as you know, if council's getting something presented to them that you're not aware of, there's a chance the case could go back to the Planning and Zoning Board. So if you would like to ask a question of the applicant regarding that zoning condition, staff would like to know what their plan is as well.
Mr. Mashburn, I think the tennis ball just ended up in your court.
It sure did. And I apologize to Deborah. Terry and I started discussing this, I think, last Thursday, and we simply just didn't have time. We've previously offered a 500-foot buffer from a school or a park there. My thinking all along was an athletic field was part of a park, but Mr. Heath wanted some additional clarification on that and some assurance that he won't be located adjacent to a park with lighting and the parking associated with it. So we have no problem with that at all. And again, that's on us. We just simply couldn't get to Deborah with the condition as quickly as possible.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to be very specific here so we know exactly what condition you're offering.
Terry, you got that letter?
And hopefully somebody is taking really good notes.
And this is the condition I'd hand delivered to Terry today. Basically, it states that we will not locate a athletic facility, public or private, within 500 feet of the common property line, between our southern common property line, which is the area right here. Right there. 500 feet within that, and we would like to add that with light, that would go for lighting and parking and I guess any ancillary service that may go with an athletic field. The topo's not that great back there either, so it's logical.
Okay. Ms. Cronin, is that what you were thinking might have been proposed? I'm trying to-
I heard about it from the adjacent property owner today.
Okay.
And then, so that language, tonight was the first time I heard it. So I think as the adjacent property owner stated, they'd like some clarification about exactly what that means if the athletic field's not located there. So I'd like to see that spelled out in writing. But if that is presented to council and it's a clarification of what you heard tonight, I'm sure you'll be asked that question by council.
That's why I'm trying to be as specific as I can right now,
Yes.
because I know a little later I'm going to have to justify what we do.
We would want to see the wording in the event an athletic field is, proposed on the subject property. And we'd like the applicant to define whether or not this area is a buffer or, what is that area going to be used for? What could happen in that 500 feet? So those are some fine-tuning points that I think would need to happen before this goes to town council. But I think the intent sounds as though that's been presented.
You want to polish it up a
And
little
we
bit?
will get that to her tomorrow,
right.
ASAP.
All right. Okay, questions?
Mr.
Knapp.
And I have one question, maybe just some clarification. I want to understand, what does 2 units per acre means?
2 dwelling units per acre?
2 dwelling units per acre mean? Does it mean that for the whole property, if you take about 76 acres, that would be about 152 units?
Could not exceed that.
Could not
correct.
exceed that. But could there be something else built along with those units? Forgive me,
Yes,
I'm giving an example.
right. For
Oh, they
example,
could. Because
that's a good
let's say
question.
the limit of the lot size is about 12,500, and there are some 17,000 square feet home lots. So let's say the average is about 14,000 per lot, and that's about three lots per acre. So I could build 152 units in about 50 acres. And the rest of the land, 28 acres or 26 acres, I could use it for school, park, and other things. Is it possible?
Yes, it is. I mean, because you're looking at the density, let me think about that for a minute. Because if you had a portion of the property that was carved out and used as a school site, and then the residual acreage for a residential subdivision, looking at the density for that.
I'm still meeting the criteria of 2 units
That's it.
per acre. I met that criteria, but I'm able to build school, park, or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, when we're looking at the density, we're looking at the gross density for the site. So if we were to subtract out a parcel for school, would we look at the subdivision and the density of that subdivision? Yeah, so at this time of the subdivision plan, if there was a school site carved out and became a separate parcel, and then a development plan submitted it would have to be subdivided to have a school site. So then we would look at the subdivision plan for the residual 50 acres and look at the density as a zoning condition for that subdivision. So the subdivision plan would have to comply with the density standards.
But I could propose a plan that will have 153 units, as well as a 10-acre area for the school and 10-acre for the park and another 6-acre for something else. And that combined together is 76 acres and meets the criteria of 2 dwelling units per acre, as it has been written in the plan, no?
That's not what I heard, Mr. Nath.
No.
Would you please clarify?
Sure. For example, if the applicant decided, and first of all, just to clarify something that they wouldn't have, doesn't appear as though there'd be frontage on a thoroughfare. So at this point in time, a school is a hypothetical because you have to have frontage on a thoroughfare for a school. But assuming they did have a school site that took 25 acres of the property and there was 50 acres left over, when the subdivision plan was submitted for the residential neighborhood, as part of the plan review, we would look at what the density was in that subdivision plan and see that it did not exceed 2 dwelling units per acre for the subdivision plan.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on that? The 2 dwelling units per acre does remain a zoning condition, is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, it would still apply to whatever land was left over for a residential neighborhood, correct.
Other questions?
Yes. There's several developed areas near there. The Old Thompson Creek, just to the south of it, I don't remember the name, but one to the north on the other side of Fluta Shop Road. Do you know what the smallest lot size in this general area is?
No, I don't.
Okay. Because I believe I didn't see any that were less than 1 or 2 acres. So we're putting lots that may be, roughly a 1/4 acre, very close to lots that, to an area where there are no lots that are less than an acre, and most of them considerably more than an acre. And Copperleaf, I believe, which is one of the closer, not one of the closest, but one of the closest areas, is 1 acre.
It's 20,000 square feet.
20,000, how about a half acre? But the lots,
Just under, right.
yeah, closer to this are considerably larger than what's being proposed.
Right, that was a concern at the initial public hearing.
Yes, I remember it. One of the concerns, well, one thing, let me ask, as far as we've had some discussion about athletic fields within the 500-foot exclusion on athletic fields that seems to be getting proposed. What about beyond that, the whole rest of this acreage? Would there be athletic fields allowed on it?
It's not excluded.
Not excluded?
Right, it is not
But they-
excluded.
So they are, it would be possible that there be,
Well, let me clarify something for you. Per the ordinance, commercial outdoor recreation facilities are not allowed in R8. Public athletic fields are allowed in R8 zoning. Private athletic fields would only be allowed in R8 zoning with a special use permit. So if a commercial private athletic field wanted to locate here, it would require council to approve a special use permit through a quasi-judicial process.
but a public athletic field would be allowed,
Correct,
and a park would be allowed.
correct.
And that would include parking, which could be paved.
Unless there's a condition that states that there shall be a buffer, a 500-foot buffer. But those are the clarifications that we don't have yet.
Because I know that one of the speakers at the public hearing before the council was very concerned about water table and more impervious surface that would affect the water table on the land south of that, Old Thompson Creek. And so I didn't know if anything had been, any study had been done, anything saying that, or contradicting that.
Those are all site plan related issues to look at that type of level of detail.
And I have some questions about traffic. Under the traffic study, the intersection of Luda Shop Road and NC 751 goes from the background in 2015 of D that falls down to an E with this development. And is there any mitigation that has been proposed as a condition to take care of that?
There hasn't been any condition in your packet proposed by the applicant. So no, there hasn't been one to date, no.
Okay. And likewise, eastbound left turn lane at Marsville Parkway and Green Level Church, again, falls from a background of D to E level of service with this proposal. And there is no mitigation that has been proposed as a condition.
Town staff had concern about adding another turn lane to an already pretty wide intersection that's under stop sign control. I think the more appropriate measure there would be a traffic signal. Adding 6 lanes on a stop sign is just not practical or safe. So we're recommending that we wait and put a traffic signal there when it's warranted. And we've suggested in the traffic study that would be a factor to consider during this rezoning, is that they don't meet warrants for a traffic signal at this point in time. We've conducted a signal warrant study as recently as early this month, and there still isn't enough volume on that intersection to justify a signal yet. Actually, the crash rate at that intersection has actually gone down since we've done a few safety enhancements there. So as development continues to grow in that area, there'll certainly be demand for a signal there at some point in time. And that's something we've suggested in the traffic studies, that this development monitor it for a traffic signal as it progresses forward.
But in the meantime, we'll be stuck with a level of service of E.
On one approach. Okay, and you look at it intersection as a whole, all the other approaches to that intersection are working within level service D. It's the left turn lane going eastbound that has that level service E during the peak hour. So you have to keep that in perspective as well.
Okay. That's it.
Other questions?
I have one. The proposed zoning is R8 conditional use, correct?
Correct.
What zoning classifications, if you can remind me, does Cary have between R8 and, say, R40?
There's R12 and then R20.
And I think this would actually be consistent with an R12 with the conditions that have been offered. Is that generally right?
Generally, with the 12,000 square foot lot size, in fact, that was a question I had for the applicant. And the reason for keeping the R8 was to have the flexibility with the building setbacks and lot widths allowed for a little bit more opportunity to place lots when you've got some topography issues. So,
in particular with some of those other uses that would be allowed in this rezoning. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Hearing no questions, I'm going to ask for a motion, please.
I'll make a motion. I will move that we forward 12 REZ 33 Luter Shop Road to council with a recommendation for approval, finding that it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans, such as the joint Chatham-Cary land use plan, and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation. And I'll speak to the motion if I get a second.
I second. Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Muir and a second by Mr. Nath. Discussion.
Well, let me speak to the motion just for clarification, that I did not include any additional conditions, but to council and staff, I make this motion with the understanding that that is forthcoming, an expectation.
Other comments?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw.
I have several concerns about this. The first one is that this is a rural area. It has a rural feel. I've driven a number of times in this general area, Luda Shop, Old Thompson Creek Road, and the roads on the other side of Luda Shop, and they're very distinctly rural. The Luda Shop Road is what would be called, I think, a country road. with cyclists, as was mentioned, and other uses that one would expect. If you just looking at this particular project and not any others that might be proposed, I noticed that according to our estimates in the traffic study, we'll be increasing the flow of traffic on Luda Shop at the point of West Farrell Road in that vicinity in one direction in the evening by 68%, and again in the morning going in the other direction by 68%. Now this is just one development. It looks like there will be other property in the area that might wish to develop likewise, in which case we would be greatly increasing the traffic on Luda Shop Road and also changing the rural atmosphere of this area. I am concerned about the possibility of parks and athletic fields, even though they would be publicly owned, and the accompanying lighting and parking and noise and other things that accompany athletic fields and parks on this property and the effect on the area of that. So I am going to oppose this motion.
Other comments?
I've got a question and a comment. The comment is that in our staff report, under affordable housing of all things, it says the site is convenient to parks and open space opportunities, including the American Tobacco Trail approximately 1 mile east of the site, as well as a future joint town-Wake County Park site on the AT&T, also about 1 mile east of the site. So we're planning on a public park a mile away. I don't understand why we're having a dialogue between Mr. Mashburn and this homeowner about lighting. How did this develop? And is there some intent to have a ball field where you have a public park a mile away?
I was going to say that, yeah, that's a question for the applicant about their discussions.
This came out of a young man who was out on the property one day, and evidently Terry's neighbor was there, and said he was looking at the property to develop a soccer field. And, you know, I talked to everybody. So I said, yeah, go out there, take a look at it. And he ran into him, and it's just a concern of theirs. The likelihood of a soccer field there is almost, it's non-existent. So it's really much ado about nothing.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just curious, as a follow-up then, since this has created an awful lot of discussion, is there a reason why you just didn't condition it out?
Well, again, it was brought to my attention last week. Last Thursday was when it was brought to my attention from the adjoining property.
Is there a reason why you didn't condition it out?
Well, we thought we had it
tonight?
covered when we gave them the exclusion for parks and schools from 500 feet, but they wanted to include athletic fields. And that came about last Thursday or Friday.
Okay. So I guess I'm going to ask my question again. Is there a reason why you know, as part of your condition you voiced earlier, you didn't also address this athletic field anxiety?
I don't know what I don't understand what you're saying.
Well, you suggested earlier that you were willing to make some other conditions.
Yeah, we would happily do that. And again, that's
Yeah, and I'm
fine.
just wondering, I'm just curious here, since we seem to have a sticking point around athletic fields. It seems to be a high point of anxiety, but you indicate you don't think that's going to happen. Well,
No, not within 500 feet of their property line, no.
okay.
Okay?
I expect that when you come to the town council, you'll have a more well-defined set of conditions, and in most cases, they watch this, so they're going to know what we talked about.
We will do that. Thank you.
Does that address your concern?
Yes. Thank you.
Other questions, Mr. Miller?
Just a comment on discussion on the motion. Noting the staff's observations that one of the things we might want to consider is the location of this site with respect to the nearest utilities and the town limits. Both are within about a mile, I think, is what the staff report says, but it also observes that because the site's in a different drainage basin, you'll have to evaluate gravity sewer service at development plan time. And then another summary observation is it's not clear whether this is an acceptable density and lot size transition. And my sense is it's not quite there. I think the new zoning conditions of the larger lots of the perimeter and the 12,000 square feet lots interior go part of the way there, but when you look at the surrounding lots, I have an issue with the transition, and I think something like R12 or R20 would provide a better transition. So I have trouble supporting the motion as stated, regardless of athletic fields.
Other comments? Seeing none, I'm going to call this for a vote. All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Can we get some hands here? Okay, it appears that we have 6. And all those opposed?
No.
3. That motion carries 6 to 3. And then I believe we're going to move on to our final case, which is one that does not require a public hearing. And that is our land development ordinance round 25.
Good evening. This is round 25 amendments to the land development ordinance. These amendments were discussed at your work session on April the 22nd. There are about 22 components to these amendments. They're categorized into 7 categories listed as A through G, and I'll just briefly go over each of those for you. Item A would change the mixed-use district rezoning process to have the first public hearing before the town council rather than your board. This item was prepared in response to council direction at the 2013 retreat. There's 6 amendments that are related to various aspects of landscaping and buffers. Item B1 would clarify the required width for linear parking lot islands and would eliminate a discrepancy that we now have in the LDO between the LDO standards and a standard in the site development standards that were recently adopted. And B2 clarifies when you replace champion trees that it's done on a per caliper inch by inch basis, so that helps us with the implementation of that. Also, item B3 clarifies that where you have exposed framing for fences, where that's visible from a thoroughfare collector, that exposed framing faces inward towards the interior of a lot. Item B4 clarifies required setbacks from urban transition buffers for lots that were created prior to the requirement for buffers in the Neuse Basin and the Jordan Lake protected watersheds. I will point out the text for this section has been modified somewhat since the work session to capture the appropriate date that would be applied to lots within the Jordan Lake watershed, because there's a difference between the Jordan and the Neuse, and that was not included at the time when you saw this at your work session. And then the other changes to this section include the creation of a new table to provide greater clarity for all of the regulations that we have pertaining to setbacks from buffers. Item B4 clarifies where strands of lights can be placed. Right now, there's some requirements that apply within the town center that would be applied elsewhere through Cary. And then item B6 is a clarification in terminology related to road types, just a minor clarification. There are a number of sub-items listed under item C that relate to specific uses. The
The first was initially proposed to create a separate definition and parking standard for medical offices. There were some changes proposed to the initial draft after you considered this at the work session. Those changes included changing the terminology from medical office to healthcare office. We added more inclusive reference to other healthcare providers to the list of examples that are included in the definition, and also clarified a definition of massage business to eliminate examples and refer only to the licensing requirements of the state. We felt like that clarified that definition in a better way. There are also two minor changes related to wellness centers. We did add the wellness center to the table of permitted uses for the town center district, and also added a parking standard for wellness centers that's comparable to what you see for retail use. We also added shopping center to the permitted use table and provided a better distinction between small shopping centers and general shopping centers. And this distinction is based on square footage. There's also a proposed increase into the amount of retail use that could be allowed in the office and industrial subdistrict of the town center. Another change would provide clarification in the definition of personal service establishments with regard to spa-related services. And we also added crematorium as a permitted use. There have been some changes to this item since your work session as well. We did reduce the parking standard after looking at that a little more closely. We also added crematorium as an accessory use to a cemetery, and changed the building setbacks to be the width of the applicable buffer, so that the setback would vary based on whether it was adjacent to a residential use or some other use. There are also changes recommended to standards applicable to residential uses in the transitional residential or TR district. Lot size, lot width, and setbacks would be reduced for detached residential use, and this is intended to provide greater flexibility in design and is in response to a number of concerns that we've heard from the development community to have a more flexible option, and some concerns that we've heard over the last few years, and so we wanted to just provide some additional flexibility in this district. Another change within that district would be to provide an enhanced definition of semi-detached and attached dwelling units, to provide a minimum length for the common wall that's required in defining those units instead of having only a maximum length. Item C2 expands beekeeping provisions, and this would allow beekeeping in conjunction with the community garden or common open space. And there are also provisions added that would address maintenance responsibilities for the hives, particularly in this type of area where there would not be someone living on the lot that would automatically be having a visual contact with the bees at most times. Item C3 is a simple clarification that would establish a volume rather than just a square footage requirement for multifamily storage areas. There's two items, D1 and D2, that relate to subdivision regulations. The first of these makes adjustments to the conservation subdivision standards based on experiences that we've had with implementations and some improvements we feel that we could make. The changes include reduction of side yard setbacks and greater flexibility in how the open space can be calculated and designed. D2 includes revisions that are related to the required improvements for single lot subdivisions and gift lots, and these changes were proposed to maintain consistency with the general statutes. Item E includes several revisions that are related to environmental regulations. These would ensure that residential BMPs are maintained by our Property Owners Association, would clarify enforcement responsibilities, and there's a minor discrepancy in some numbers that would, in the two different places in the ordinance, that would be corrected. Item F would provide an option to allow suspended signs to hang from decorative posts within the town center. And this amendment was initiated to provide an alternative for an existing sign in the town center that's now suspended from a tree limb. And also it would bring 2 existing signs that were installed prior to adoption of current standards into compliance. And lastly, item G includes 10 sub-items that are largely administrative or procedural in nature. Item G1 clarifies that a decision of the planning director regarding an unlisted use can be appealed to the Board of Adjustment. G2 specifies that a vested right certificate would be requested only at the time of the initial site or subdivision plan. The applicant could not come back at a later date to request that vested right. And G3 provides an option to send a notice of violation by regular mail in addition to registered or certified mail as currently required. Item G4 ensures pedestrian connectivity consistent with the town's comprehensive pedestrian plan. And G5 is a change in terminology from citizen-initiated to owner-initiated annexations, wherever that appears in the ordinance. There have been several revisions to item G6 includes a number of changes. These are all related to decision-making authority and is primarily proposed to maintain consistency with state statutes. We have had several revisions to this item since your work session. Some of these changes were in response to comments made at your work session. We did revise the text related to the waivers of cross-access requirements to clarify that the criteria used when considering those waivers could apply either to the subject property or the adjacent property, since they're, by the nature of that condition, there would be tied together. And also in that same section, the word possible was changed to practicable as a more accurate term for when the planning director is evaluating that and looking at the viability of making those cross connections. In addition, we provided some additional language that would allow the engineering director to waive construction of certain improvements that would otherwise be required by the comprehensive transportation plan. And also, the change would allow the engineering director to approve payment in lieu of construction for road improvements that would meet certain criteria that would be a more minor in nature, below a certain threshold for cost and that sort of thing. Item G7 just clarifies that site and subdivision plans can't be phased in a way that would have the effect of avoiding LDO requirements. Item G8 would eliminate the ordinance that was approved back in 2010, where we had a substitute performance guarantee section set as a temporary ordinance while we were having an issue with bank and developer defaults during the economic downturn. A new item G9 that clarifies requirements for lakes and dams when they're dedicated to the town. And finally, a few technical revisions and corrections related to the roads APF amendment that was adopted back in February. Staff recommends that you forward these items on to the Town Council with the recommendation of approval, and staff is here to answer questions if you have any.
Thank you. I'm going to open this discussion up for questions. Do we have questions?
I have questions. On the item about beekeeping, C2, we're adding a requirement that people have documentable training in beekeeping. in order to do this. What other permits or places do we require individuals to be trained in order to get a permit or be allowed to have something, to do something?
I'm not aware of any other sections where we have specific training requirements, but we felt that for the beekeeping to have, just to have some provisions so that there would be an awareness and someone who was invested with that responsibility for overseeing the bees, since in other cases, they will be on individual, single-family lots where there would be someone living on the lot.
So we're looking for who the designated person is there?
Well, we're asking as part of getting that permit that someone would be designated with, you know, and we would be flexible in terms of, you know, looking at certifications or courses taken, or but some means so that we would have some confidence that there is a person who has, you know, been engaged by the homeowners association or whoever is responsible for that open space, so that if there's an emergency, there's someone that could be called, and someone who would be monitoring the bees on a regular basis to make sure that the hives are in good shape and that they're maintained properly. And we would just want to have some sort of assurance that oversight and maintenance was happening.
So I guess it concerns me, the idea that we're going to have a qualification bar that staff is going to assess about whether this person is an adequate beekeeper or not. And we don't do that for any other permit. Public buildings that people go into with roofs over their heads, and I mean, there's no other area that we do that. So, I mean, it's almost more like a concealed carry on bees, you know, in terms of having some governmental requirement that there be training in order to issue that permit. So, you know, that's, I would just say I don't like that piece of it. The other question I have is about the lighting in downtown. Currently, they can have twinkle lights in downtown, but if I'm reading this correctly, we're eliminating that provision to non-blinking lights and then expanding it townwide. Is that an accurate understanding of what's going on with this amendment?
That's correct. We tried to clarify the definition and some of the terminology that was used in the text before. We had the term that is currently used is and I think it's in quotes, a twinkle type light. And I think what that was intended to mean are very small, you know, the very small bulbs. So we wanted to provide some clarity with the definition of what that intent was, so that we're not proposing for that, and nor is it the intention now to have flashing lights, but rather to have small bulbs or small tubes. You know, in some places you may see them outlining, you know, enhancing, outlining a building and those sorts of things, and just allowing that town-wide as opposed to just in the town center.
But we used to have, but it sounds like there used to be a provision within the town center for that to have some element of movement to those lights in terms of blinking or twinkling, or they wouldn't be called twinkle lights. Right.
Yeah, they've never been allowed to twinkle, I mean, blink.
It said twinkling.
Well, twinkle,
before.
like you said, the terminology is just that they're small lights. They've never been allowed to be flashing. It never was the intent of council for them to be flashing, so we've never allowed that to occur.
Okay.
So,
I don't want to get into a long discussion about what twinkling looks like, but, okay, thank you.
I have a question. I can't remember if this came up in the work session. On item B2, the champion trees, is there a minimum caliper that the replacement trees must meet? In other words, if a 30 caliper inch champion tree is removed, can I replace it with 31 inch caliper trees?
Well, I think I believe that the minimum that anything can be replaced with is 2 caliper inches, I believe. But if you had a 30 caliper inch tree, then, and you wanted to replace it with a minimum 2 inch, you would need to replace it with 15 trees. So we're trying to create that relationship. Right now, with the way that the ordinance is written, you could have a large tree, but it wouldn't necessarily be replaced with as much as you would have otherwise.
And
So it makes that provision more clear that from an inch-by-inch basis you get.
And I understand the difficulty of planting more mature trees, but have we considered something saying maybe up to a maximum, some sort of percentage or something that would help to ensure that, some set of larger trees is there rather than just the 2 caliper inch minimum? If I do replace something, is that realistic to consider?
We would have to go back and we could go back and take a look at how to word that differently. One of the issues that, issues that has to be balanced out with that too is if you replace trees, if they're too large, then the survivability rate goes down very quickly.
I understand that difficulty,
but we could
there might
certainly
be a better balance there.
We could certainly take a look at that to look at a minimum, see if there was a way to look at a minimum threshold based on the larger size.
Other questions? I'd like to ask about the public hearing process change. I believe I read that this community workshop recommendation is now going to be in the hands of the town council, whereas previous, because we had the first public hearing, that it was one of our prerogatives. Is that correct?
That's correct. The process, if adopted as proposed, would have the first public hearing before town council. The town council could then make the decision if they wanted to call for the community workshop. If they did call for one, then the community workshop would be held, and then it would come back to this board as another public hearing, because presumably there would have been, assuming that there had been some changes made to conditions as a result.
Because I think that's a little different than what we have done, in that, as I recall, it's been a while since we've done a community workshop, but as I recall, when we did decide to do one, at the conclusion of that workshop, it came back to us.
That's correct.
And so now it's going to be initiated by the town council, but it will come back after the community workshop to us. Is that correct?
Correct. It would come back to your board with more information than was available at the initial public hearing if the community workshop had been held. So you would have the benefit of whatever input was provided at the public hearing plus the input from the community workshop.
Okay, I'm going to be a devil's advocate here. In theory, a community workshop can produce significant changes to a proposal. If the first public hearing held by the town council ends up suggesting a community workshop, big changes happen, it comes to us. The council has really never seen the revised case before, or they never have a chance to have a public hearing on it, because the last public hearing is here. Is that our intent?
I think that's something, as we take this forward to the, as we didn't get any comments from the council at the public hearing related to that. That's certainly something that we could, ask for, their clarification on or bring up before making that decision. There, is always a possibility if council feels that they want to have another public hearing or consider things differently, that they could always, as with any rezoning now, send it back, have their discussion and send it back to P&Z for further discussion.
I'm thinking that it might be appropriate for the town council to have a public hearing opportunity after a community workshop is significantly changed, a proposal.
Okay.
If not, they basically never have a public hearing on the revised proposal, and all they do is hear a recommendation and vote on it, and that strikes me that maybe we're missing the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish.
Okay.
Other questions?
I'd just like to echo Mr. Miller's and Mrs. Muir's comments. I got a little bothered by the champion tree idea too of, you know, take down a 30-inch tree or 30 caliber tree and you put 30 small ones in there. It would seem to me there would be a reasonable minimal level where the survivability of the tree is over 50%. As to the beekeeping qualification, I don't remember this being discussed in our workshop, quite frankly. I know we talked about the bees, but I don't remember the requirement of the license. And again, I sort of feel that there are a lot more dangers to owning a dog than there are to owning bees. And we don't require an educational requirement for dog ownership. Certainly there's a greater preponderance of dog owners than there are beekeepers. And it would be a little heavy to ask for that, but to sort of come back and say, well, you're a beekeeper, you need to have a certification. Most of these people really don't get into this without some type of, I don't want to say educational certificated preparation, but they certainly come at it with a little more knowledge than maybe the average person that buys a dog or takes it home from the pound with no idea what the personality of the dog is like. So that sort of troubles me as well. So just for what it's worth, I agree with you that it's a little draconian in my mind.
Well, maybe we can split that part out when we have a motion and vote
I've heard
separately on it.
4, and with the question, I'd be willing to make a motion to split out the ones I heard.
Well, if we don't have any other questions, I'm going to come back to you then, because it sounds like you have a strategy.
Whenever it's time.
Excellent.
Could I just make a comment, just for clarification, just in case there's any confusion with this point? This requirement doesn't apply to all beekeepers. It's only where you have the hives in common open space, or, you know, an area where there's not a homeowner that is inherently living on the site to provide that. So it's not all beekeepers. It's only in the situation where the beehive is in common open space or a community garden.
Do we have an example, an existing situation that is
Well,
analogous?
the ordinance doesn't allow the beehives in those areas at this time. So that's why we're adding at the request of, you know, there was a request initiated by a council member just to expand our beekeeping provisions to look at addressing the community gardens and the open space. And in the course of doing that, you know, trying to look at some of the factors that are unique to those areas and recognizing that, you know, there is some specialized knowledge that goes along with bees in order to keep them safe.
How do you feel that the requirement for documentable training enhances it as opposed to just having that person designated on the permit or documentation with the town?
I think when we looked at the documented training, again, the threshold with what we were looking at is, you know, is just to have some comfort that whoever was applying for that had taken at least some preliminary coursework or had some education in it to at least to realize that there are some unique factors to bees and a certain level of education that is appropriate, and that they would have that awareness.
I'd like to follow up on that. When I have beehives on my property, I'm responsible for what happens, okay? When beehives are on community property, who's responsible? If, God forbid, something goes wrong, something is irresponsibly managed and someone else is impacted, who do we go to? And I think we want to be able to go to someone that's on the permit that has indicated that they will be responsible. Now, I could see where neighbors might say, well, I want to know that if this is on my community property, that the person at least has some idea how you manage bees so they don't hurt other people. If I'm liable on my property, I have to make sure of that, because if not, I will end up paying for it. On community property, I think it maybe isn't such a bad idea to have a little bit higher standard.
Well, I would probably agree, except we don't do that in any other area of, we don't qualify a builder who builds on common property. We don't ask for their documented, did you go to school in construction management? Did you go to school in engineering? We just don't do it in any other area, and I just think it's, I think the idea that, no offense to staff, but whoever is going to review that permit is going to say, yes, you're qualified, or no, you're not. And what do they know about beekeeping?
That's a very good question. What's good enough?
Yeah, we do require, I believe, the builders who build for other people and on common property would be licensed.
Right, any building over $30,000 does require licensed contractor.
Okay. Do we have any sense for what's good enough? I took an online course that took 2 hours in beekeeping. Is that good enough? I think we're struggling with, is this an onerous requirement that says you have to take a 6-month course with a 2-hour written exam, or is this I have to have at least learned enough so that I can make sure the bees don't harm someone?
I think I can speak for the current staff. Our intent is just to look for something that's credible, something that demonstrates some practical awareness. We are not looking for an ultra-high standard, just someone who has some familiarity. And the difference is that you've described, that this is, rather than a single-family lot, this is common open space. It may be, there's an existing example downtown where there is a business that's being conducted out of what used to be a single-family home. They have a community garden on the property. No one lives on the property, but they have a hive there. Other examples that have been suggested have been at churches, common open areas and subdivisions. There's an area, a garden area next to Whole Foods that's been suggested. So certainly this can move forward. This suggested requirement's not critical, but it is intended to just apply to these areas where you don't have someone actually residing on the property, and they can have, they may have no one there, or they may have a large influx of the public there, depending on where they're located. And the thought is that someone who has some greater awareness than the typical layperson would be a good one to have to contact, if there were an emergency or something. But we don't intend to set that bar ultra high. The intent is just to, someone who has some familiarity is saying, yes, I'll be the contact, and I'll look out for this hive, since it's in a more public, more common type of location. That's the thought process. Hope that helps.
Well, I didn't realize we were talking about public spaces only. And that's what we are talking about, correct? This is just for an open public space.
Yes, it would be, homeowners association, open space, those types of spaces where it's open to the residents of a subdivision. I mean, it may be private as opposed to open to the general public, but it's...
This may be much ado about nothing, because to me, the idea of this happening very frequently doesn't seem to be big on the horizon to me. My objection was based on, it seemed like we were applying this universally to anybody that had bees, and that bothered me. But the only thing that bothers me here is, well, okay, what's the criteria for satisfactory? But, I think when we went through the workshop on bees, and we had the professor from NC State here, I believe that either he or one of the beekeepers in the work session said there were courses at NC State that you could get qualified to be a beekeeper, or at least have a substantial enough knowledge to get started at it. Assuming that that's all we're looking for here, then I back off from my kind of initial horror that we're getting this specific.
Do we have other questions? Mr. Miller, I think it's time for your motion.
I'll I'll make a motion. I move that the board forward LDO amendments round 25, with the exception of item A, the mixed-use rezoning process, and item B2, champion trees, and item B5, strings of lights, and item C2, beekeeping, to town council with a recommendation for approval, as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans, and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation. And I'll add with the expectation that those other things could be addressed individually. Will that work for staff? I'll make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second. Discussion.
So what happens to those that are pulled?
We can, well,
We'll go
no,
through them one
We'll
at
make
a
the
time.
we'll go through them one at a
We'll
time.
have
make some-
opportunities to make motions on those this evening.
By the way, who seconded that, please?
Mona.
Do you want to talk to why you singled out those four?
I heard discussion, comments, questions, and perhaps concerns that people might want to address those individually.
Anyone else wanted anything else carved out? In that case,
I'll just make a comment. I don't need it carved out, but on the hanging signs in downtown, I've seen some of those that are actually quite charming. And it's part of Americana, and it's part of small town Norman Rockwell to a certain extent. I get what we're doing, but I don't know. A nice tree hanging from a sign, or a sign hanging from a tree, doesn't bother me. But it's not going to stop me from supporting the group of amendments.
there being no other comments, I'm going to call this motion to a vote. All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed? I believe that motion carried unanimously. Let's go back now and talk about item A, which is the mixed-use district rezoning process.
I think you had some comments on that, and I don't have a particular motion on it, but it seemed like maybe you were asking for some more work.
Well, you understand what I'm talking about, right? Do we need to kind of carve that out in a motion?
Well, I mean, you could make a, you could propose to make changes. I mean, are you proposing to make a change to?
Yeah, let me take a run at a motion. Actually, I shouldn't have thrown that back at you. I should have just taken the run at a motion. I move that we send item A, mixed-use district rezoning process, to town council with a recommendation with approval, with a revision that after community workshops, an additional public hearing will be held before the town council before the case is sent to planning and zoning board. And now I need to ask for a second.
I'll second that. I understand.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion?
I have a question about whether that would mean that we're going to just not see it at all at P&Z, or is it going to come back to us for a third public hearing before then it goes to council again?
Let me remind you, when we did it, we really tabled the public hearing. We really, the community planning workshop effectively came in the middle of our public hearing. We tabled the public hearing and then brought it back again after the community workshop because the process assumed that we had concerns about what we were hearing and we wanted to give it a chance to get polished up. I'm suggesting that the town council do exactly what we did.
Okay, my concern there is that we're lengthening the overall process time by requiring now 3 public hearings instead of 2, if it has a community workshop
Not
assigned
really,
to it.
because when we did it, when the first public hearing happened with us, we did exactly the same thing.
To me, it just makes it symmetric. And when it started with us, you had the 2.5 or 3, whatever you want to call them, public hearings. Now that it starts with council, it just makes the process symmetric in that if there is this community workshop, it goes back to them and then to us. It would have gone back to us and then back to them.
Right, but let's talk through this for just a second, because I think what I'm hearing is that previously we had applicant comes to us for a public hearing. This is the longest it could be. They come for a public hearing, goes to a community workshop, comes back to us for a second public hearing, goes to council. That's 4, even if you just went boom, 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 month, 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 month. You've got 4. Now,
Let me adjust you a little bit, because I think you're almost right. I believe the public hearing that we held that resulted in the community workshop never had a vote. So therefore, we effectively tabled that public hearing for the community workshop period and then reconsidered the case.
No, we either voted to send it to community workshop, or we voted to approve and send it to council. Those were our alternatives. But in any case, even if we did table it that way, you're still talking about a process that required 4 subsequent meetings.
I think it still goes to a public hearing at council then, doesn't it?
Yes.
After the community
ours,
workshop,
right.
after ours, it still goes back. So
Okay.
there's 5 things there.
Well, that would be the 4th meeting, though. That would be, so first meeting is public hearing here, community workshop, second public hearing here, public hearing and decision at council.
Right.
Okay, now we're going to go public hearing at council, community meeting, public hearing at council, public hearing at planning and zoning, and then public hearing, or not public hearing, back to council. So we are effectively adding to the length of the development process by requiring it to go back to public hearing. What they've suggested is we go public hearing at council, community meeting, public hearing at planning and zoning, and then back to council, either public hearing or not public hearing, and you're still only at 4. So I think that's kind of that's what we give up to send it back to council for their review of the community meeting, as opposed to our review of the results of the community meeting. And if they still have, can they still have a public hearing at council at that final 4th meeting? If we've already had one at the very front, one with P&Z, community meeting, can they then also have a public hearing at that final council meeting, if they've already had 2 public hearings?
The way that it's set up now, there's the public hearing at the end of, if council wanted to have another public hearing, they could set it up to do that. I would say that if there's a public hearing, an initial public hearing at town council, then you have the work session or the community meeting. And then if it goes back to council for a public hearing to take in that information, there would only, when it comes back to P&Z for the recommendation, that meeting would really only need to be a public hearing if there were changes that had been made after the second town council public meeting. So it's still a meeting, but whether or not it would have to be a public hearing would much the way that you have your rezonings now, it depends on if they make changes.
So that may or may not be a public hearing, and council's final meeting may or may not be a public hearing, depending on whether there are subsequent changes at each step in the process. Is that correct?
Well, the final meeting at town council for a typical rezoning is typically a meeting as opposed to a public hearing, unless they send it back to you to call for another public hearing.
But do they have the option to make it a public hearing?
They would have the option to address this, to write that into the ordinance for that to automatically be a public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, should we not be discussing this detailed level analysis of designing the system in a work session rather than in this meeting?
How would you, that's a good point. We're starting to tear things apart. I was about to make the point that, in fact, there's a town council meeting before it came to us for a public hearing, so effectively we have the same number of meetings, but
They don't have that.
well, I think we're at a point right now where perhaps the best answer here is, can we carve this one out, do a work session on it, get into detail so everybody understands this, because I think we've got a lot of stuff flying around here, and maybe it would be valuable for us to all understand the process, and then bring this one back. Do we have to vote on it tonight?
We could do that. What Ms. Grannon just pointed out to me is we do have several cases that are waiting to submit for this to be resolved, and that would result in about a month's delay, just to make you aware of that.
Now, currently, when it comes under our current process, it does not go to council first for MXD, right? It comes straight to us first?
That's correct.
Okay.
And
so
one of the reasons that we feel like that making this change would be beneficial is that by having the first public hearing before town council, the applicant knows up front whether or not there's a protest petition, because that's something that they don't get that information to the very end of the process right now.
That's helpful.
One approach might be to reject the recommendation for this A1 and then submit to the town council that we reject this change to the LDO amendment A1.
Could you please
If you're not comfortable with that.
I think they want you to speak up a little bit, Cary. so-
All I'm saying is that it looks like there's a lot of discussion going on and not everybody seems to be on the board, but there is a need for some resolution from the town council and the staff. And we can make a resolution to reject this proposal made by the staff on LDO amendment number A1 or whatever that, EIA, item A. If that's what you want to do. But you have a resolution on the table right now.
Right, you do have a motion.
Yeah, I do have a motion on the table, so
Could you restate the motion? It's been a while.
I move that we send LDO Amendment Round 25, Item A, with a recommendation for approval with the amendment that after a community planning workshop, a case will go back to the town council for a completion of the public hearing before it gets sent to us.
I second that.
And we had a motion and a second. So we've had a lot of discussion. Do we just want to vote on this motion and see if we can? So all those,
I am going to make a comment that I'm going to vote against the motion because it does lengthen the amount of time that a project is in the pipeline, and because council already has a second review of it when it goes to that final meeting, if it comes back to us directly from the community meeting.
that's fair. Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, let's get hands. Okay, we have 5. All those opposed, say aye.
No.
We have 4. Okay, so that motion barely squeaks by with 5 to 4. We now need, I think, to go to B2.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we table item B2 of the LDO amendments to enable staff to investigate, this is Champion Trees, to investigate the possibility of finding a minimum caliper inch replacement, that general idea, and request that staff do that.
Okay.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I will second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. No discussion? I'm happy. In that case, I'm going to call this one for a vote. All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries unanimously.
I'm going to make a motion on item B5 that we send it to council with a recommendation for approval, seeing that I was the one kind of arguing about it a little bit. But while I would like to see twinkle lights, I don't think I'm going to win that today, so let's just vote on it.
Do we have a motion? Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries unanimously. We now need to go to, is it C2 we're down to?
C2 beekeeping.
I only separated because others had concerns about it. I don't have a
Right.
particular motion to
I
offer.
think this came down to yours, so you want to make a motion one way or the other here?
Well, sure, I'll make a motion one way or the other. I'll vote that we send C2 back to work session for further discussion.
Okay, second? Anyone want to second that? We have a motion and a second. Discussion.
Help us out. C2 is what?
Beekeeping.
Beekeeping.
Just to clarify, if we're going to have a standard, let's kind of nail that down a little bit tighter.
Does this do any harm putting this one back to a?
Do we have a bunch of bees waiting for?
No.
I don't think so.
No.
I'll just say I I generally favor the proposal that was here, but I think we can probably benefit from additional discussion at a work session, given the discussion here, so I'll support the motion.
Agree. Okay. We have a motion, and Ari, you seconded that, right?
I second it.
Yes. All right, we have a motion and a second. Since we don't have any additional discussion, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed?
No.
That motion carries 8-1. And I believe that's it.
You got all that?
I make a motion that we adjourn.
I will second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, that motion carries. We are adjourned. I got to get better at using.
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.